Warmly welcome you to the session entitled Mainstreaming the COVID-19 Recovery, the Importance of Supporting Women in Entrepreneurs, MSMEs, and Digital Trade. I have been invited in my capacity as permanent representative of Switzerland to the WTO to moderate today's exchange. And I am delighted to see so many of you being interested in the public forum. It is indeed a valuable exercise to bring the matters discussed within the WTO to a broader audience. And as we wish you to be part of the discussion, the Q&A session, that is about 15 minutes, will take place in the midst of our exchange. I would therefore encourage you to send in your questions as soon as they arise. Questions, as you might be aware, can only be asked in writing. If you are following online, this is possible via the Q&A function on your right-hand side. If you are participating in person, you are invited to follow the instructions on the leaflets in front of you. Today's discussion is devoted to the benefits of mainstreaming women's economic empowerment and supporting women-led MSMEs and digital trade. 42% of firms owned or managed by women are micro, small, or medium-sized enterprises. And as women-led MSMEs, they experience greater difficulties to cope with crises due to lower levels of financial resources and limited access to public funds. This means that the effects of the pandemic are aggravating existing vulnerabilities and inequalities. Many channels through which COVID-19 is having a greater impact on women are lower wages, fewer educational opportunities, limited access to finance, greater reliance on informal employment, and social constraints. Inadequate access to digital technologies and lower rates of IT skills further reduce women's opportunities for teleworking and e-commerce, and thus for adapting to the current crisis. Worldwide, the percentage of women that own a mobile phone is 8% lower than the percentage of men. There are still 300 million fewer women than men who have internet access. It is therefore even more important now to ensure that digital transformation is inclusive and guarantees affordability, access, use, and ownership of digital tools for all. Just a few words about Switzerland and the Swiss perspective. From our perspective, we have a very keen interest in this discussion. In our 2030 gender equality strategy, women's economic empowerment is one of the main objectives. Switzerland supports women business leaders to excel in the field of digital solutions. There is, for example, the initiative Female Founders that aims at reducing female underrepresentation in the startup sector. Moreover, we think that digital tools should not only be made for women, but also be made by women. Therefore, the Swiss strategy also focuses on increasing women's representation in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics study path in tertiary education. Lastly, I would like to mention that the Swiss Federal Office for Gender Equality developed a tool called Logip that allows companies of all sizes to self-test simply, anonymously, and free of charge if they meet equal pay requirements. It won the United Nations Public Service Awards in 2018. The tool is available in English and accessible also for companies outside of Switzerland. Now I'm looking forward to hear our panelists' views on how to better mainstream women empowerment, MSMEs, and digitalization into COVID-19 recovery efforts. Let me introduce our guests. Joining us from Nigeria virtually is Mrs. Opeoluwa Ashimi, founder and CEO of ProMain and ProMaid. Her business is providing healthcare in rural areas where there are no doctors. An impressive number of 500,000 people are in the reach of their service. Then we have with us on the panel, Mrs. Vanessa Erok-Bokbo. She is Chief Sustainable and Inclusive Value Chains at the International Trade Center and head of the She Trades Initiative, which is currently connecting around 3 million women to the market globally. Mrs. Erok-Bokbo has over 20 years of experience in trade and private sector development and occupies several advisory and steering positions. And lastly, joining us on the panel is Ambassador José Luis Cancela, who is the permanent representative of Uruguay to the WTO and also coordinator of the informal working group on MSMEs here at the WTO. As such, he has accumulated in-depth knowledge on the challenges faced by MSMEs. I'm also looking forward to hearing the closing remarks of Ambassador De Boer, permanent representative of Canada to the WTO, who will round off our session. Canada, as you know, is a forerunner in mainstreaming gender into policies. I regret to inform you that Mrs. Gady Gallo, the head of the Presidential Council for Women's Equity of Colombia, was not able to join us from Bogota today. And before we start the panel, I would like to encourage you again to submit all your open questions to the panelists. With the first question, I'd like to turn to Ambassador Cancela. José Luis, could you introduce us to the specific challenges women-owned and MSMEs face and what Uruguay is doing to support women through trade policy? José Luis, please. You will speak in Spanish, as I understand. No, okay, up to you. Good.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Chambovi. Thanks a lot, Didier. And good morning, everyone, colleagues, friends. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you this morning. Well, I think that COVID-19 crisis clearly showed that digitalization, cross-border payments, and paperless trade had been critical for the survival of MSMEs all over around. But I dare to say that we can easily agree that trade can affect women and men very different. So the impacts on trade policies on women as workers, consumers, or entrepreneurs need to be assessed and tackled with that in mind. Women are disproportionately concentrated in the MSMEs and informal sectors, both as workers and as business owners. ITC studies show that women are often employed on a casual or temporary basis and are therefore the first to lose their jobs when we are going through a crisis. Pandemic has generated a different pattern of impact on men and women-led enterprises. Women-led firms reported being more strongly affected by COVID-19. That's a clear fact we have. Today, we know these figures. Around 95% of companies across the globe are MSMEs, accounting for about 60% of the world's total employment, employing a disproportionate share of less qualified workers, young people, and women. MSMEs were expected to generate 600 million new jobs by 2030 before the crisis began. I have to say that, of course, the health, I don't know if the COVID will pass, probably not, but the health crisis will pass, that's for sure. And without a MSME strong sector, it will be impossible to recover a positive trajectory towards achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. MSMEs are key to to pull from the recovery process after the crisis will be gone. And that's something important we have to keep in mind. For these reasons, MSMEs become, I would say, a key factor in the coming years for all countries, developing and developed countries. Women tend to operate smaller business than men, and are more likely to do it in non-capital intensive sectors, including personal service, which often have lower potential for generate a high and sustainable income. This implies that female-led MSMEs are key if we are to develop a sustainable and inclusive trade, which can only be achieved by bringing them into the playing field. If we put this in the context I mentioned before of the key role MSMEs will play in the economic recovery process, we can see how important it is that we can take concrete and decisive actions to help MSMEs led by women to make this process successful. I mean, it's not just a gender issue, it's also a very critical economic trade issue. Encouraging female entrepreneurship is decisive also to tackle inequality and poverty. Some of the benefits entailed by MSMEs participation in international trade could be magnified where MSMEs are owned by women. Going to Uruguay, let me say that Uruguay recognizes gender inequality as a factor that restricts human development and is manifested above all in the gender gap in terms of participation and economic opportunities. We want to lift barriers in international trade to promote the economic autonomy of women, and it is time to take concrete actions so that women become true agents of the economy and decision makers. In that sense, I want to say that we have implemented the ITC program She Trades, coordinated by the private sector to help women-led by MSMEs, women-led MSMEs, to connect with others around the world and make good businesses. That's all about. So thanks again to the ITC for all your help on this regard. We have also the program we call in Spanish Sembrando, that will mean sowing in English, that aims to aid women in rural areas to become part of the domestic market and in time to become part of the international market too. In terms of trade policy, I would like to underline that Uruguay and Chile were the first two developing countries in the world to include a gender and trade chapter in a free trade agreement. Within the negotiations that Mercosur is carrying out with Canada, the incorporation of a chapter on trade and gender is included as a major point in the negotiations and in the text we hope will result from them. The inclusion of gender provisions in trade agreements has been a huge achievement as it introduced new language and different considerations into the trade negotiations. They emphasized the gender commitments regarding gender equality in all areas of economic activity, labor relations, access to education and health, among others. Uruguay, through the meeting of ministers and high authorities of Mercosur, wants to promote the practice of incorporating gender provisions and chapters in all Mercosur trade agreements. Just to conclude, let me say that helping women in business is helping MSMEs to better integrate into international trade. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. And in particular, your last sentence, helping women in business is also helping them to participate in that international trade. And now I'm turning to a businesswoman. I'm turning to you, Mrs. Ashimi, you're online from Nigeria. And perhaps you can elaborate on the challenges and opportunities that the COVID-19 pandemic created for your business and how you reacted to this. Mrs. Hashemi, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Didier, and good morning or afternoon or evening to everyone, wherever you're watching us from. Definitely, COVID-19 had its own impact on us as a woman-run business, and also as an MSME business. When COVID hit in our own country in March, we had to quickly pivot our business by leveraging digital tools. We had a lot of support from the ITC to leverage AI and machine learning to deliver our services in remote communities where there are no doctors. This basically meant that we had to change from a face-to-face service delivery model to a model that basically leverages mobile phones and remote care to continue to provide services to rural communities, especially when it was even more challenging for our clients to pay for service because we had a nationwide lockdown for about 2 months. But over time, we were able to improve on our service delivery, leveraging technology. And then that meant that we improved even our revenue solutions after the lockdown to about 3 more models. That meant that we could reach more people in rural communities. We could even employ more women as part of our community health teams in the remote communities where we work. One takeaway from what we experienced during COVID was that we realized the importance of digital transformation as an MSME. It's very, very key that women-run businesses, especially those in the medium, small size enterprises, leverage digital tools, because COVID has made it very clear that even after the pandemic, a lot of businesses that are not online might suffer the ability to scale. Leveraging on what Ambassador Cancela had said earlier, it is true that a lot of women-owned businesses are small and they stay in the informal sector. But the question we should ask ourselves is why? Lack of access to capital, lack of access to the capability to scale makes them stay in this niche space. The advantage that digital transformation gives is that women-owned businesses can then quickly scale their businesses with even the limited capital that they have. This is why the discussion around growth for and recovery from the pandemic must include digitalization for women-owned businesses so that they can scale their businesses. We put this thesis to test in this year after experiencing for our own self what this did for our business in 2020. We supported 150 women in the first phase of what we call the Digi Women Initiative that we launched this year. We were able to transform mom and pop stores into e-commerce stores. Today, when we look at the impact of this investment in our rural women compared to the increase in their revenue, we believe that we have developed a model that can work across Nigeria and probably across the world by providing tools for rural women, for mom and pop stores, for MSMEs to transform their informal businesses into digital businesses. We have the capability to increase their participation in the global trade. To bring this home, McKinsey report has already said that when we empower women entrepreneurs to digitalize their businesses, we can increase the global GDP by $12 trillion in 2025. Therefore, my own guidance to policymakers here today would be to create more actionable policies that support the digitalization of women-owned businesses and tie that as well with providing financing that will help them transform their business and scale and therefore improve their participation in digital trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hashemi. You have underlined the importance of digital trade. And I think that the ITC is deploying a number of efforts in this area in supporting entrepreneur and women-owned businesses. And we're very lucky to have you, Vanessa, this morning, and perhaps you would elaborate a bit on that aspect that is extremely important.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chambéry. And it's really, I love being back here at the WTO in person and seeing some old friends and colleagues as well. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I want to thank Canada, Colombia, Nigeria, Uruguay, and Switzerland for the collaboration in organizing this panel. So I think, I'll be quite succinct because I think a lot has already been said by fellow panelists. It's really important for women to be part of digital transformation because they disproportionately benefit. And as Ambassador Cancela said, the majority of women-owned businesses tend to be smaller. The flexibility that is offered disproportionately benefits them. When you're a small or micro business, you're also the driver, the salesperson, the head of HR. And for women, this is even more crucial as they continue to bear the brunt of responsibilities for unpaid care work. In every economy in the world, women spend more than twice as much time on unpaid care work. Second, the anonymity can afford a shield from gender-related discrimination in business. And third, through e-commerce, they can access new markets, which is what every entrepreneur wants. A study we did, I think it was 2018 SME competitiveness report, we found that the share of women-owned companies in e-commerce was double the share in traditional markets. And of course, over the last year, we've witnessed companies like Opel or Luas really turn to online markets and digital trade. But of course, this can only be a powerful tool for growth if women engaging have the right digital skills and technical know-how. So for example, in e-commerce, entrepreneurs need to know if they should sell directly from their own website or on an online marketplace. I mean, the questions go to, very granular and very detailed distinctions. Which online payment system should they use? What about transport and logistics? What other platforms are out there, whether that's Instagram or and so on and so forth. Complex customs, you spoke about customs, paperwork, which is now online. And then, of course, finance. That was the top issue that was cited by the companies that we surveyed in our COVID-related surveys to find out what the impact of the pandemic was having on them. So this is why last year we really embarked on a big effort to support companies on their digital journey. First of all, we boosted the amount of content that we have online. So we did a lot of, we put more, I think we have 150 courses now on our virtual learning space, all manner of trade-related courses. We also did mentoring. We built the capacity of thousands of women on digital marketing and e-commerce. Women learned to design and implement data strategies, legal requirements of setting up websites and how to use apps. We took women techpreneurs through mentoring on advanced technologies, machine learning. We worked with Microsoft on the Microsoft Leap program to facilitate product development. And then we also redesigned, and this is, the top, after access to finance, access to markets, we redesigned our trade fair preparation for women entrepreneurs into digital space. So this included mentoring on investor pitches for technopreneurs as well as supporting businesses with creating digital communications materials, online lookbooks, catalogs, and so on. And so you see that we're completing a part of the puzzle of helping women capitalize on the enormous opportunities in the digital sphere. But of course, there's a lot more to be done, and that includes providing the right ecosystem, the right regulations, and access to financing as well as digital tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Erok Bogbo, for your consideration. And I think that we can take a first round of questions. And actually, I have already received some questions. There is one question on the figure that I mentioned in my introductory remarks, where the 42% of firms owned by women are MSMEs. This is correct. This is what I said, and what the statistics are confirmed by the expert in MSMEs. That's good. I have another question, and two questions which are kind of overlapping. The first question is, how can multilateral organizations and WTO members increase access to credit and investment for women led by MSMEs? Perhaps José Luis, you want to take that one, and also Vanessa, because you are providing assistance directly on the ground. José Luis.
Thank you very much, Didier. Well, for quite a long time, I have to say now, access to finance has been a key obstacle for MSMEs everywhere. That's a big issue that has to be dealt with if we want them to be better integrated into the international trade system. We all know the famous figure of 1.5 trillion US dollars finance gap for MSMEs. Unfortunately, there are signs that this figure is not only maintaining its high level, but it's even in widening. So the gap is becoming wider. And that's undoubtedly a big issue for all MSMEs. And as many of them are women-led, of course, it's a big issue also for in the context we are discussing today. I said that we are in our informal working group on MSMEs. We're exploring ways on how to help MSMEs, and of course MSMEs led by women, to overcome this obstacle. First, I would say exchange of good practices is something we have to explore more, and I think we have to practice more. I mean, even these days, I heard some amazing examples from some African countries, for example, regarding inventive ways of addressing this finance gap for their MSMEs, which I think it will be very useful. We can share with others in the realms of our informal group. Then we are also discussing other solutions to try to overcome this obstacle. I mean, we have to make progress on the MSMEs identification, so they can build trust in a better way with the credit agencies. I think it will be worthwhile also to discuss the sometimes very traditional criteria that banks and international institutions use for rating enterprises, particularly talking about MSMEs. Perhaps some of the criteria that they use to rate regular companies are not the better suited to rate MSMEs. So that's another interesting discussion I think we have to have regarding this. With that, I leave our friend from ITC, please.
Please, Vanessa.
Thank you very much. And I think, one of the challenges that financial institutions have is, they incorporate the element of risk, as well as the cost of processing into the pricing of their credit. But I think what we need to do is we need to drive private investors to market segments which they would have otherwise perceived as more risky, and that's MSMEs and women-led businesses. I'll use a specific example of something that we are trying to do at ITC. We've partnered with an impact investor and with an NGO, an INGO, Care International, to put together an impact fund structure that actually brings together the public sector, so governments, to provide catalytic capital that can protect investment from the private sector. And in this way, governments investing $1 can mobilize $4 of private sector investment into this fund that then makes loans to women-led businesses. We've seen already investments from the government of Côte d'Ivoire in a similar structure that's investing in techpreneurs actually in Africa. So we know that it works, and it's really a way to make the funding that governments have available go a bit further. I think in addition, governments can provide funding through development banks, so more development-oriented loans, because long-term financing is often an issue, as well as supporting the establishment of import banks and supporting export credit products within the financial system.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Eropokbo. I propose, perhaps, Vanessa, once again, it's a question that you should normally be able to answer. And this is the following: how is SheTrade collaborating with other Africa women organizations to synergize and make it easy for informal sector to be able to access your services?
I will give two types of examples. So when we're working at the policy level, for example, we collaborate with about 50 business women's associations. So we're doing a lot of work on ensuring that the AFCFTA is more gender inclusive. And one of the things that we did there was we put together this network of 50 women's business associations to really work with them to understand the key challenges of their members, and to work with them and experts on the ground to put together a set of, we came up with 40 key recommendations for policymakers on making the AFCFTA more gender inclusive. So that's one way in which we're working with women's associations on the ground. And particularly on the informal sector, we have a program that's funded by the government of South Korea in West Africa for West African countries, Côte d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. And there we're working with 10,000 women farmers and women-led, and this work, a lot of the work is done through these cooperatives, so women-led cooperatives, to support them improve their output, to improve their products, and we're starting to work with them on processing as well.
Thank you very much for this. And I think we can take a last question before turning to the second round of the panel. That's a question regarding the protection of intellectual property created by women entrepreneurs as they grow their digitally oriented businesses, especially in their early growth phase. And I would like the person who asked the question, Virginia Rigoni, is asking how the WTO can help protect the IP created by these women entrepreneurs in the digital area. I don't know whether, Jose Luis, you have any idea about this, or whether you're familiar with this kind of issues, intellectual. that's what the WTO can do to protect intellectual property created by women entrepreneurs, in particular as they are developing digitally oriented businesses, And but here, perhaps I don't know whether Mrs. Hashimi, you're online, and you just mentioned that you have to develop digital solutions to face the crisis. And did it happen that you wanted to have some protection for the IP you have created, or to get a patent for a solution that you have developed?
Thank you, Ambassador Didier, for the question. Indeed, a lot of, just like most women entrepreneurs do have limited knowledge about technology, they also have limited knowledge on how to protect their intellectual property. When we had our own mentoring session through the ITC on how to leverage AI and machine learning more in our business during the COVID-19 in 2020, we were well supported to also have access to a team of legal experts on how to identify the IP we were creating and also how to protect it. Knowing that digital solutions have a broad class of IP in them, not all might be relevant to patenting, but there are definitely other ways to protect proprietary solutions that you create along the way. And this has also been incorporated in how we share this information with the women we are currently supporting this year to translate their mom and pop stores to e-commerce stores. So inclusive of how you protect your trade secrets, how you protect your algorithms, and also how to limit access and sharing of information about your business. All of these are actually important IP that most women-owned businesses do not know, and definitely limits their scalability and ability to grow beyond where they are. It's therefore important that as ITC is also supporting a lot of countries, just like they have supported us during the mentoring session, that governments, and probably I would want to also challenge financial institutions who are benefiting from policies of government to include digitalization support for women-owned businesses, traditional women-owned businesses during the moratorium period. I would use our own model as an example. It takes us about 2 to 3 weeks to help mom and pop stores translate to e-commerce stores. So if someone came to a financial institution to ask for a loan, the bank could also provide that kind of support and also highlight not just the business management solutions that can help them repay their loans on time, but also how to protect the intellectual property involved in the digitalization process. This way, the channels with which women-owned businesses are communicating and integrated into the formal sector become also channels for them to learn about IP protection and digitalization, and also access capital for them to scale. For every dollar that we invest in women, we get an additional 81% return according to the Boston Consulting Group. So it is good business to invest in women because we yield 35% more return than men-owned businesses. So definitely we can expand our ability to support women by providing, integrating IP, intellectual property knowledge and education with digitalization alongside access to finance for women-owned businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hashimi. I mean, it was extremely interesting what you're saying. And as you know, the WTO is providing a general framework for the protection of intellectual property with minimal standard in the TRIPS agreement, the so-called trade-related intellectual property rights agreement. But of course, the implementation of the agreement is the task of the government, and also giving access to protection to their own citizens is also something that has been implemented, that has to be implemented at the national level. And I believe, and it is very interesting what you said, Mrs. Hashimi, that it is important here to find ways to better protect the intellectual property that has been generated by women. We have other questions. Yes, and Jose Luis would like to add something.
If I may,
Yes, of course.
I'm a strong believer in synergies and team working. So at this point, I would like to say that we have a new Director General at WIPO who has tapped many times on MSMEs, and he puts a great emphasis on intellectual property and MSMEs. And we are already exploring together. I mean, he was so kind to talk to our informal working group on MSMEs, and we're exploring together ways that we can make intellectual property more useful and more at hand for MSMEs. As usual, we are talking, when we talk about MSMEs and MSMEs-led women, we are talking sometimes about very granular things, as it was mentioned. So on one hand, there is a government responsibility, and as it was said here, of course, we have treaties, we have norms that it's our responsibility as governments to put to the people. And that we governments, we have to keep in mind that we cannot ask a small entrepreneur in some developing country, you know, to hire a bunch of lawyers to make registration for them. That will not happen. So we have to be creative and find out ways where we can make this registration easier for concrete small entrepreneurs. They cannot go to the lawyer and so on, as we do in some countries. We have to keep that in mind. So we have to be creative about that and to think how to take these things to the people. There are, in WIPO, there are magnificent instruments like the PCT, for example, which offers the possibility of register your intellectual property without moving out of your city. And you have an international protection doing that. Well, but that is something that we have to make it to be known for the people and to easier the way people access to this kind of instruments. We were also, beyond the traditional ways of protecting intellectual property, we have been also discussing with WIPO, for example, the possibilities of using intellectual property rights as collaterals when requesting loans. We were talking about access to finance. This is, I mean, it's a complicated issue because we need there the banks and the financial system to discuss how to value intellectual property rights. That's the problem. But it's not an impossible task. Just wanted to add that. Thanks.
No, but it was extremely useful, Jose Luis, clearly, and it's good to learn that WIPO is also involved in this business. And perhaps, Vanessa, this is an aspect that can be factored in the project supported by ITC. Yes, please.
If I may jump in, indeed, we partner with WIPO and they've been providing a great deal of support in helping us help enterprises navigate this.
Time is lapsing very quickly, and I believe before we wrap up and we give the opportunity to Stephen de Boer to summarize the debate, perhaps I would like to invite our panelists very briefly to mention one recommendation they would have for governments or the private sector in order to close the digital divide, gender divide, I would say. Just one very short recommendation. Vanessa, would like to start, please.
With 3 billion people around the world still disconnected from the internet, my one recommendation would be that governments partner with telecoms companies to provide better access and affordability of internet to women.
Thank you. This is very clear. Mrs. Hashimi, would you have a recommendation? Perhaps you would address to the governments and.
Thank you.
Are you still with us? Yes, please.
Yes, I am. Yes, my one major recommendation would be to simplify access to formalization and digitalization for women-owned businesses. Therefore, the way the formalization process currently means that only big businesses or men-owned businesses who have access to capital can actually go through the process of formalizing and then digitalizing their business. By creating a streamlined process where a one-stop shop is available for women-owned businesses to register, get access to support for digital transformation, and then access capital, we will definitely accelerate the number of women-owned businesses, not just using digital solutions, but also scaling across the world. The Rwanda model is something that we can look into and also scale globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'm turning to Jose Luis.
Thank you, Didier. Well, I would like to say three things regarding digitalization. First of all, gender inequality in the physical world is replicated in the digital one. So we have to keep that in mind. And of course, building capacities is very important. Training is very important, but there are also significant socio-cultural norms that restricts access for women. That makes us to think that access alone is not enough. Women need also to address these socio-cultural barriers to their access, and we have to put an emphasis on capacity for them too. Then government, private sector, yeah, governments, we have big responsibility on that. We have been talking about that, but regarding the private sector, let me add one more thing that was mentioned yesterday in one panel, that you know, we need intentionally committed private sector actors. We were talking about value chains, for example, and the importance to help MSMEs to integrate it into value chains. And we have here one example of one big multinational that, you know, the project didn't work until they put someone in the field that was monitoring what was going on. So that means that when big business, private big business, wants really to integrate MSMEs into their value chains, they want really to help MSMEs, well, they have to be intentionally committed. That is, they have to charge someone to take responsibility and all that. And if you allow me, I would like to end up with a quotation from one of the panelists yesterday, a former USTR assistant for Africa, Rosa Whitaker, and she said, we have to measure progress not by the strongest, but by the marginalized. And the marginalized are MSMEs and are women. So twice in this case. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. We still have 3 minutes to spend perhaps on addressing a question. And there is a question asked by James Sibley. Do gender chapters of FTAs do enough to support women-owned businesses? And it's a new feature, clearly, of FTAs. As we know, FTAs have been evolving over time. You mentioned your experience, Jose Luis. I don't know, Stephen, if you want to chip in, not as the last speaker to summarize, but just to share the experience that you have made in your FTAs. Because I can imagine that Canada should have such chapters in FTAs.
So I think we should be realistic about these chapters. These chapters are important, and they speak to what Jose Luis just mentioned, which is this notion of intentionality. This is a signal that governments and the signatories to the trade agreement will consider these, will consider gender in their policy making, in their trade policy, and in the functioning of the agreement. But I would also say that this is a first step. what has to happen next and what has to happen here at the WTO as well is mainstreaming gender across the organization, across the trade agreement. So I think we have to be careful in not saying this is the answer to the issue of mainstreaming gender, but this is a very important step on the road to mainstreaming gender. So, and it's more than a symbol, but it isn't the end game at this stage, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Stephen. And it's right. I mean, we have to manage expectations. It's a new field, it's a new area that we're discovering. And in particular, I mean, the work on MSMEs, because we know that MSMEs and women business are closely related. And all the work that we're doing here on MSMEs to help MSMEs and to allow them to flourish will indirectly benefit also women entrepreneurs. And this is something that is important. And this is the process that is being run here at WTO by Ambassador Cancela. And it is work in progress, clearly. I mean, there are different steps, and we're taking one after another. Then I think that we are heading towards the end of this meeting. I would at this stage perhaps even invite you to share your perspective and also to deliver the closing remarks. Please, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, Didier, and thank you to the panel. It's my pleasure to be the final speaker for this event, for this excellent discussion. It's more important than ever that we look at the links between trade and gender, because the impacts of the pandemic on the underrepresented and marginalized groups are being well documented, and sources have shown that they've been hit the hardest. While barriers for women-owned MSMEs have always been present, the pandemic has served to highlight the challenges that women face in the trade sphere. That's also why events like this are so valuable for our work here at the WTO. It's wonderful to hear not only from governments, but directly from businesses and organizations that support them. It's important that we understand both the challenges that women-owned businesses are facing on a day-to-day basis, as well as the strategies that they have used to succeed and grow their businesses. Hearing these stories helps us to know that we're on the right track and that we are engaging in policy making that is really going to make a difference on the ground. We've also heard today about efforts by government to benefit women in trade. Governments can play an important role both in crafting policies that will allow governments to succeed and in providing support necessary for small businesses to grow. We've also heard today about the importance of intentionality in government policy making. We can all benefit from exchanging best practices in policy making and programs to support women-owned business. It's also clear from today's discussion that digital tools can play a key role in enhancing opportunity for women. The use of digital platforms is providing women entrepreneurs with greater access to markets, knowledge, and more flexible working arrangements. In Canada, we have heard from women entrepreneurs and small business owners about the critical role that e-commerce tools and social media have played in helping them to develop a brand, connect with customers, and expand their business, including across borders. We've also heard about how to pivot to digital trade has helped small companies to weather the challenges of the COVID era. Helping women-owned businesses to make the best possible use of these tools will be an important key to unlocking their growth. And I think this speaks to Vanessa's plea as well. I also want to wrap up this session by bringing the discussion back to the WTO. A few years ago, this type of discussion would never have happened in the WTO context. People argued that gender had no place in discussions on trade because trade was gender neutral and the rules of international commerce treated everyone the same. And there's a growing recognition that rules are not gender neutral and that they can lead to unequal outcomes for different groups in society. And that's why Canada is proud to be a member of the Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender. Through the hard work of committed members and with the support of outside stakeholders, gender issues are now becoming more fully integrated into our work on trade. Members are currently implementing the Trade and Gender Work Plan, which is built on 4 pillars: aid for trade, research and data, best practice workshops, and the gender lens. We've had success in integrating gender considerations into the work of the WTO, and there's much more that we can do. Members are currently hard at work on preparing a statement for MC12, and soon after, they will turn their attention towards turning their priorities and intentions into concrete action. Exchanges like the one we've had today will continue to be valuable as members explore options for better integrating gender into the work of the organization. And it's also clear from today's discussion that this issue cuts across various areas of work, such as the work on MSMEs and e-commerce. I look forward to seeing how this discussion evolves and what ideas we are able to make a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. And I think we indeed had a very good discussion. And in particular, it was very good to hear from a representative of the private sector who is confronted with problems on the ground, daily problem, and to hear also from you, Vanessa, who is supporting those businesses run by women, and also from the policymaking side. And it's right what Stephen said. I mean, I've been in this business for quite some time, and I would say it's only until recently that really we can have this kind of discussion in the context of the WTO, and that we are accepting and admitting that trade rules are not gender neutral. And then there is something we can do about this. And I hope that the discussion we had today will contribute to crafting concrete solutions. We have had very clear recommendations, and we know what we have to do. Now we have to get down to work and to make a difference on the ground. Thank you very much for your participation.